All right, welcome back to the channel. On today's episode, we're going to be taking a look at the YUKA series robotic lawnmower from Mammotion. Now, I've already done a really in-depth review of Luba 1, Luba 2, and YUKA, but that review of the YUKA was a pre-production model, meaning that they were still working it out. This is the production model that's going to go out to all you folks if you buy one. So I wanted to bring one in, check it out. There's been updates to the machine, updates to the app. Both claim to have some improvements. I want to set this up. I want to test it in a similar environment that we tested it the first time, see what the differences are, and make sure this machine is awesome for your yard care. Let's open it up, let's get started, and let's get this thing mowing. Before we get started on the video, I want to throw a few stats on the board that you can take a peek at. Pause them and look at them. Otherwise, let's get on with it. Mammotion's packaging is always very nice. You have everything you need right there with very little assembly to get going. One thing that they're the winner on right away, these cosmetics just look absolutely insane. Reminds me so much of the Tesla. So we're going to start out with a spray sealant from the automotive business. We just spray it on, wipe it off, and it'll just leave that super hydrophobic, super slick, super protective coating on your machine. We want to roll the machine over and let's do the undercarriage too. This is going to make cleaning the grass clippings off later really easy and just make your overall cleanup so much easier. Now that we got that done, let's spray some water on there just to show you what it does. And wow, look at that water just beading right off. And then when it comes time to wipe it, boom, gone, easy. So when you're setting up your charging station, you want to leave plenty of room around it. Let's check it out here. It's roughly about 7 or 8 feet that it takes for the machine to come out of the dock and start its process. And it takes about the same amount to come back in. Right here is about 7 feet. It'll do its 180-degree turn. It'll pick up the infrared sensor off the charging station and now it'll auto dock itself in. Now a lot of problems start when you don't have the area around here. Some people wedge them into corners or they have obstacles all around their charging station and the machine struggles to get in and out. So make sure you have a nice clear area there. The RTK unit should be mounted on the side of your house or garage where it has a full 360-degree view of the sky. That's where it's going to get the most satellites. What happens is the satellite signal comes down to the RTK. It compares the current GPS location versus its known location. At that point, it comes up with some corrections. It sends those corrections down to the robot. So these corrections are going to come down to the robot and it's going to compare it to its onboard GPS. And it's going to allow it to keep within centimeters accuracy, even really close to the wall here. And that's including all these obstacles that are in the way between the robot and the RTK. Here's where I located my charging stations in relationship to the RTK unit. Now we'll plug in the charging station and let the robot charge up to 100%. Getting the app set up's pretty straightforward. I'm just going to buzz through this. You can rewind as needed to get the information you need. Now that we got the robot all set up, let's let the battery charge up to 100%. But first, let's go ahead and make a manual adjustment on the cut height adjustment knob to set it up for the grass height that you have prepared. We'll talk more about prepping your grass for a robotic mower later. Just out here looking at this grass, I mean, that Luba 2 is just doing an absolute phenomenal job. Look at that. We're going to run the YUKA on top of it and try to get it down to even more carpet-like because that has kind of a floating head, which is really neat. It floats along the surface and really gets a really consistent, good cutting. But look at that. Wow. I haven't touched it either. Now it's time to do the mapping, and I can tell you that this is arguably the most important step in the whole entire process. Having a good solid map around your property with conservative margins where they're needed just prevents damage to the machine from bumping into things. It prevents unwanted interventions, and ultimately, if it's bumping into things, it's going to eventually tear up the grass in that area. So the mapping is super key. Let's get mapping. So the mapping is complete, and I tried to be conservative. I wanted to get as close to the borders as I can, but I know that it's going to require some edits. So let's take it for a test lap around, but we're going to be prepared to edit the map as needed. If it bumps anywhere, we're going to edit the map, do another test lap. If it bumps anywhere else, we'll just keep repeating this process until we end up with a map where it'll do the first perimeter loop without any bumping whatsoever. Now this plan works in both ways. If you're bumping the side of your border, we would edit the map to put a little bit more conservative margin. The same token, if you're noticing that it's not cutting quite close enough, we can edit it closer. But the key is to run these test laps and get it to where it'll do your whole property without any bumping or anything like that. That's going to get you off to a great start. Now the first point where you see most errors is the entry point into the perimeter lap. You can see it gets kind of close here. We want to make sure that it's going to do this without any bumping. Pay special attention near those really complex corners. You can see here the accuracy of this GPS and the RTK system is absolutely insane. It's just getting as close as humanly possible, or robotically possible. Ooh, but here we go. We got a bump. That was too aggressive of an intercept there. So it'll continue on. It'll back out and keep doing its progress. But let's go in and edit the map. Modify. We'll drive the mower back to the beginning, put it on the perimeter line, and we'll reset that edge, and we'll make a much more easier intercept angle on that corner, and we'll see how it does. So that shallow intercept angle looks much more reasonable. I'm interested to see how that's going to do. So now that we got the edit complete, you'll see that it does a much more shallow intercept here, and yes, that's going to leave a little bit of grass. We're going to talk about that here in a minute, but it's much better than bumping and doing an evasive maneuver. And you can see it does get really close. Look at that. I mean, and it'll produce just consistent results time and time again. But if they're bad results, it's going to be consistently bad. So make sure that you get a good outer perimeter lap laid down. That's most important. Now as it tracks around here, I leave a nice little margin there, and that looks good too. Now the deep 90-degree corners in the pocket like this is where it has a little bit of trouble doing that without bumps, so I leave a little bit of margin here also. And I do have some uneven pavers here, so I kind of make it turn in a little bit more, but if it wasn't for that uneven paver, I would have just squared it off and went right down the edge. So I like to let the robot overhang slightly. I'm going around a sprinkler here, but I want to barely get onto the paver so that it does a nice perimeter cut right there along where the edging is going to happen later. Now you can see here, this is incredibly complex. We got obstacles on the left. We got a raised slab there on the left also. So again, I do a nice little 45-degree intercept here, and it cuts no problem whatsoever. And then as you start driving straight away, you can make your way over closer with less conservative margins. I want to try to keep my corners straight, coming back and overlapping slightly. Here comes another complex corner. We got rocks, we got my gas grill there. I stop it just a few inches early, do that 45-degree on the corner, try to get it up in there close to kind of minimize the weed eating. And we're riding right along the edge here. And this would be an example of you could scoot this over more if you wanted to. You could play with it, but again, we just don't want the bumping. Just for demonstration purposes, I take it back in this little notch here just to see how it'll do. The maneuvering with this zero-turn Castor wheel is just unbelievable. And here's the garage for my Luba 2. I wanted to get really close to this. Run it right down the side there. You can see it gets really close, so I really like that mapping on that. And then it's completed, and look at it go. We're gonna send it all the way around in a time lapse and back to the charging station. Now this would be where you'd want to repeat the edits as needed. Keep doing the laps around the perimeter until you get it absolutely dialed in. Another really neat feature with this mower is manual mowing. That's where you're going to use your cell phone and you're going to drive the robotic mower around just like a remote control car. You can do this inside the map areas or outside in an unmapped area. If there's a spot in your lawn where it's not worth making a map for and you just want to run it manually, it's kind of fun to drive it around. But today I'm going to be using it in those areas where I was unable to get a really tight margin there. So I'm going to run it underneath of these trees, get that mowed down. Another smart thing to do is with this border, just have a nice electric weed eater and just come out there and clean that up occasionally to keep it looking decent. Most golf courses have a real short putting green, and then they have the fringe, and then they have the fairway. So having multi-leveled grass is kind of cool. So plan your borders so that it looks nice also. One of my favorite tests out of all of them is the smart object avoidance. Now the company claims the robot will go in and out of objects, minimizing the amount of uncut grass, but not bumping into things for a safety issue. Now, other robots out there claim to do this, but I'm not sure it's going to be this good. This stuff is good. Wait till you see it. I wanted to show you what it looks like through the onboard camera inside the robot. This is cool. Comes up, takes a peek, goes around the object, turns back into it where you can barely see it in the left corner here, and then it continues on its track. That's really neat. When it comes back on its next path, it's going to take a turn to the left here because it's the shorter distance. Make its way around the bucket and pick up that track line and continue with the cut. Now the boot's a little smaller, but it doesn't have any trouble at all detecting it and making its way around. With the prototype model, it didn't do very well with the ball test, but it looks like it's recognizing the ball really well, backing off. This is a small object, so it's trying to figure out what's going on here. It's deciding to take a left turn, and you're going to see it's going to take a wider margin on this because it's a small object, but it avoids it very easily with a very comfortable margin. It did really well avoiding all these individual objects, but in Hawaii detailing fashion, we're gonna load the yard up with all three of them at the same time. So here it comes, I'm looking forward to this. Sees the bucket, heads on around with its normal avoidance pattern. Oh, it's gonna cut between the two. It's going to try to get back on its track, and then it turns and ooh, it sees the boot, gives it a little nudge. Decides to do another avoidance measure. Taking a nice wide margin here. Comes back, it sees the ball, it doesn't like that. Now it's going to take another really wide margin on that small object, which I appreciate. Get back on its track and continue cutting. Now it's coming from the other direction. It sees the ball again. Goes around the ball, and this time it does something really neat. It decides it's going to take a really wide margin, go around the property, pick back up onto the perimeter, and it's going to bypass the objects altogether and continue cutting on the left side of it, which is really neat. That's a really neat feature there. These robots have come such a long way, even since I've owned them. And it'll just continue doing its tracks back and forth until it finishes the grass, just avoiding that obstacle riddled area altogether. That passed the obstacle avoidance test with flying colors. I was very happy with it. So with the over-the-air updates, meaning they send updates to your phone, which then update the machine, it just keeps improving more and more and more each time we get an update, which is nice. Just like the Tesla, it just constantly keeps evolving with user feedback and testing. So I'm really happy with the obstacle avoidance. But while we're on the topic of safety, let's talk about a few more features that all the Mammotion products have. The first one is the stop button. The robot pulls up, press the stop button, immediately stops the robot right in its place. The next one is the tilt sensor or lift sensor. The robot comes at you, you lift it up, the blades stop immediately, so there's no risk of lifting it and someone sticking their hand in there and getting chopped up by those razor blades. So that's really neat. That's really thought out. Another cool feature on the robot is the rain sensor. Now, this robot's designed so when it detects heavy rain, it'll detect the rain and it'll put itself away on the charger, and then when it dries out, it'll resume the cutting. That's kind of cool because if it's raining too hard, it could tear the grass up, and it also will clog up the cutting head and just do a poor job. So if you're in a really rainy area that rains all the time, just keep in mind that this is designed to put itself away in the rain. Now on this beautiful sunny day, I don't have any rain, so I'm going to simulate rain right here with my spray bottle. So you'll see me come up to the robot here. I'm spraying it onto the robot into the rain sensor. Now when it gets enough water where it connects those two contact points, it's going to trigger the robot to know that it's raining hard, head back to the charging station. That's a really neat feature. So if your robot's heading to the charger in the rain, now you know why. What really sets the Yuka apart from the Luba 1 and Luba 2 is the Castor Wheel on the front. Now this Castor Wheel on the front really shines in small, complex yards, less than a half an acre, with a lot of sharp turns and really nice turf grass. This is where this machine is just absolutely perfect for. That Castor Wheel enables it to do the turns, floating like a magic carpet with zero damage to the grass. In comparison, the Luba 1 and Luba 2 four-wheel drive, they're going to climb the gnarly hills, they're going to do all the tough stuff, and they're going to have a little bit more effort turning. So let's watch this Yuka. Look at it just gliding around these turns, just back and forth, and I've observed this over and over again, and there's just zero damage to the turf grass, which is really nice if you have a property like that. And it's just zooming up and down, cutting these lines, and you're just not seeing any evidence that the lawnmower went over it other than the grass looks amazing. So that's really neat. A commonly asked question with these robots, how often do we cut the grass? Now there's a fine line between cutting too often and the robot's just driving around. That can be hard on the grass if it's doing it too often, and not enough. We never want to cut more than 1/3 of the grass blade off at a time. That'll lead to scalping and browning, and it's just lowers the performance of the whole cut. I'll put a list up here where you can check out some common factors that'll play into it, and over on my website hawaiidetailing.com I went much deeper into all these topics to help you get a better understanding of how often you should cut your grass. Now that you have a general understanding how often you should cut your grass, it's time to talk about zone and schedule management. Now with Yuka, you can have up to 20 different zones, and to get from one zone to the other, you'll use what's called a channel or a pathway, and it'll be a GPS track, and it can be pretty complex to get from one to the other. Inside the app, there's an infinite amount of ways you can schedule these different zones. Let me show you how I did mine. So which robotic lawnmower is right for you? Is it Yuka, 2-wheel drive, or the Luba, 4-wheel drive? That choice is up to you, but I'm going to give you all the details on the differences between the two. So we'll start out with the Luba 2 4-wheel drive. It can climb a slope up to 38 degrees, and wet, slippery rocks, just not a problem whatsoever. So if you have ultra rough terrain, tall grass, a lot of hills, a lot of slopes, this machine is just going to make its way through there, no problem whatsoever. Yuka maxes out at 24 degrees slope, and what happens is when it gets to 24 degrees, it sets off its tilt sensor and shuts down the mower. But don't be fooled, this thing will climb some really good hills. This driveway at my house is very steep. It's got a steep angle on it, and Yuka goes up and down it no problem whatsoever. Now here's what really sets the 2-wheel drive apart from the 4-wheel drive. It's going on that steeper hill, and it's doing off-camber cutting with relatively steep hills here, and you'll see the 4-wheel drive just biting in, getting the job done, no problem whatsoever. This is impossible for the 2-wheel drive mowers with the Castor wheel on the front. They would just be sliding down the hill. If you have terrain that looks like this, you need a 4-wheel drive mower, that's it. Don't even consider the 2-wheel drive models. Look at those wheels just biting in and getting this job done. Just laying down perfect stripes, tall grass, no problem whatsoever either with this mower. So that really looks great. It did a great job down there in that rough area. Now we're going to go over and tackle the rocks and go up to my last zone, which is up a really steep hill over some rocks. The grass is kind of tall here, and you can see it just autonomously goes up there. This would just be impossible with a 2-wheel drive. Now it's going to cut this upper section. Back and forth, laying down some pretty nice stripes there. Check out this off-camber action right here. Again, without 4-wheel drive, any type of slope like that on a side cut is just going to be a disaster. And again, a great job in a zone that by most mowers would be unreachable. With Luba, you set the cut height within the app, and this has some advantages to it. This enables you to have different zones with different cut heights planned at different times. With Yuka, you set the cut height adjustment on the top of the mower. Once you set it, it stays that way until you adjust it again. This is a manual setting. So far, it's been a winner for the 4-wheel drive, but now you're going to start to see where the 2-wheel drive just absolutely does great. When the Luba turns, it has to drag the wheels around. The 4-wheel drive is awesome for rough terrain, but it does work a little harder to make those tight 180-degree turns. And you can see here close up, and the Luba does have these really neat side rolling wheels, which really helps out. So that's a benefit, but it's definitely not a Castor wheel on the front. You're going to trade turning ability for hill climbing ability. In comparison, the Yuka turns like it's on a magic carpet. There's zero damage to the grass. It just goes back and forth. And this is where the 2-wheel drive with the Castor wheel is the clear winner. That short turf grass, really complex layout, lots of turns. The Yuka is just going to do a far better job in that situation. Cut quality is another area where Yuka just outperforms most of its competition. It goes back and forth effortlessly across the grass, and it's got that floating cutting head, so as the machine bounces up and down, the cutting head stays level on the turf. That enables you to get that flat carpet-like experience out of your yard. 4-wheel drive models, on the other hand, they have a fixed cutting bed, and they do a really nice job, but it's not quite as carpet-like as the Yuka. Another thing Yuka has that I'm looking forward to testing out is this bag system. It'll pick up debris, leaves, clippings across the yard, and then go to a pre-designated area and dump it out. I'm looking forward to giving this thing a try, seeing how that works. Now I'm going to share with you easy answers to most problems. Now I'm on Facebook. I read a lot about these machines and everybody, their concerns, the issues they're having. And I feel like 95% of it is user error. Whoa, don't beat me up. Don't beat me up. There's no technology that's perfect. I get it. And every once in a while, you got to put your tech savvy hat on and get down in there. But first of all, you have to understand the limitations of the machine, what it can do, what it can't do, and how to work within those limitations to get the most out of your robot. Now, here is most of the common things that I feel like would prevent 95% of most people's problems. You want your RTK location to have a good 360-degree view of the sky. The better the view of the sky, the better the performance of this robot. That's going to give you great long-distance accuracy, up to 3 kilometers away from the RTK. I haven't tested that, but that's the claim, and that's going to give your robot great performance, even around obstacles, trees, walls, down the hill, far away from the RTK system. And this is where you're going to see that border performance where you can get with it'll drive down a consistent track within a couple centimeters. Again, you just got to lay that nice perimeter out. Charging station location. This is another good one. We should have that open area in front of it, allowing the machine plenty of room to get to the charging station and to leave the charging station. If you have obstacles around it or inside some complex area, you could experience problems with the machine getting in and out of the charging station. Mapping errors along the borders, the machine bumping into the fence, the wall, or some sort of area. You got to go in and edit the map and get a solid perimeter lap laid in. Keep running your perimeter lap over and over again until you successfully remove all bumping, all scraping consistently. Once it gets dialed in and it's consistent, it's going to keep doing the same thing over and over again. But you got to get that initial mapping done properly. Another common error is grass length and lawn prep. We gotta get the grass cut down to a height that's workable within the mower's limitations. You can use your lawnmower, you can use your weed eater, but throwing the robot down into deep grass and expecting miracles to happen is just not gonna work out. It's not good. For those of you that stuck around to the end, I appreciate it, and don't think for 1 second that I forgot. Oh, this thing right here is sick. I like it a lot. See you on the next one. Yeah.